She had built her entire life around endings. Not the messy, tear-soaked kind you see in movies. Not the thrown wedding rings and slammed doors and sobbing into wine glasses at midnight. No, Talon dealt in the clean kind of ending. The kind that came with court filings and asset disclosures and a signature on the dotted line. The kind that cost $350 an hour minimum and left both parties walking away with exactly what they deserved, or as close to it as the law would allow. She was very, very good at it. And if there was a version of this world where a woman could love her work the way other women loved their children, Talon had found it and moved in without leaving a forwarding address. It was a Tuesday morning in late October when everything began to quietly shift, though she wouldn't recognize it as a shift until much later. She would tell herself in the weeks that followed that it had been an ordinary morning, that she had simply been sitting in her usual chair at the window table of Augusto's, the small Italian-owned coffee bar 2 blocks from her offices on 5th, with her second Americano of the morning going cold beside her open laptop. She would tell herself that she had been reviewing the Harrington settlement, a particularly vicious little divorce involving a hedge fund, 2 vacation properties in Aspen, and a husband who had, it turned out, been maintaining a second household in Portland for nearly 4 years. She would tell herself she had been perfectly fine. But the truth Talon rarely made room for, was that the morning had felt like most of her mornings lately, like a held breath. She was 38 years old. Her firm, Voss and Associates, occupied the top floor of a glass building that caught the Seattle light in a way that made people stop on the pavement below and look up. She had 7 junior attorneys who were afraid of her in exactly the right way. A paralegal who could read her mind, and a client list that read like the guest list of a fundraising gala. She owned a 2-bedroom apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows and a kitchen she rarely used. She had a standing blow-dry appointment on Thursday mornings and a black cashmere coat that made her feel like someone important, which she was, of course. She knew that. She had always known it would be like this. The siblings, Marcus in Denver, and Lisa with her husband and 3 kids in Bellevue, all of 20 minutes from Talon's apartment, called when they remembered to call. She answered when she could, and when she couldn't, she sent a short text that was warm enough to satisfy them, and brief enough to close the conversation. She loved them. She was certain of that, in the way you are certain of things you've never had reason to question. But sitting at their kitchen tables, watching Marcus pour cereal for his kids, or listening to Lisa talk about renovating the mudroom, Talon always felt the strange, low hum of being a guest in a language she had never learned to speak. It wasn't resentment. It wasn't even loneliness, exactly. It was simply the particular silence of a woman who has arranged her life precisely the way she wanted it, and finds on certain quiet mornings that the arrangement is very quiet indeed. She would not have called it loneliness. She would never call it that. She was on the second paragraph of the Harrington notes when the door of Augusto's opened, and a cold blade of October air moved through the room. She didn't look up. She had learned long ago not to look up at every door. It was a habit she had trained herself out of sometime in her early 30s. That involuntary turning toward sound, toward movement, toward the possibility of something. She had decided it made a person look like they were waiting for something. Talon Voss was not waiting for anything. She had everything she needed, and what she didn't have, she had decided she didn't want. She didn't look up when the door opened. She didn't look up when she heard the ordering at the counter. A low voice asking for a black coffee and a sesame bagel. She didn't look up when footsteps moved slowly through the room, pausing here and there with the unhurried ease of someone who had nowhere pressing to be. She kept her eyes on the screen, her fingers resting lightly on the edge of the keyboard. She didn't look up until he said her name. Talon. Just that. Just her name, spoken quietly, the way you say the name of something you weren't sure you would find. She looked up. The man standing beside her table was tall, taller than she remembered, though she was not yet sure why she was remembering anything. He had a jaw that looked like it had been drawn first in pencil and then gone over carefully in ink, and eyes that were soft, unhurried brown, the kind of eyes that didn't rush you. He was wearing a dark grey coat, open at the collar, and he smelled, even from where she sat, like cedar and something warmer underneath it, something clean and faintly familiar that moved through her before she had a chance to prepare herself for it. And then she knew. She knew the way you know a song from the first 3 notes. She knew before her brain had fully assembled the evidence, before she had catalogued the jaw and the eyes and the particular way he was standing, with his weight shifted slightly to the left, the way he always had, the way she had noticed once and then never forgotten without knowing she had remembered. Lara. His name came out softer than she intended. She heard it as it left her and was mildly annoyed at herself, though she hoped it didn't show. It had been, she did the calculation quickly, the way she did all calculations. 15 years. 15 years since the last time she had seen Lara Agatha in person. And yet here he was, standing beside her table in a coffee bar in Seattle on a Tuesday in October, holding a paper cup in one hand and a small paper bag in the other, looking at her with those soft brown eyes like no time had passed at all, and also like a great deal of time had passed, and both of these things were equally true, as she had no idea what to do with either of them. She stood. She didn't plan to stand. It simply happened. The way certain things happen when the body makes a decision before the mind has been consulted. And then they were hugging. It was the kind of hug that surprises you, not tentative, not the polite press of near strangers reacquainting themselves, but a real hug, the kind that carries the weight of the years it's crossing. He was warm. He smelled exactly as good as she had registered from a distance, and somehow better now. And she found herself holding on a beat longer than was strictly necessary. Her face briefly against the lapel of his coat before she stepped back and became Talon Voss again, composed, her expression reassembling itself into something measured. "I can't believe it," she said, and she meant it more than she wanted to. He was smiling. Lara had always had a smile that operated at a lower frequency than most people's. Not wide or performing, but quiet, like light coming through a gap in the curtains. It had undone her once, that smile, a long time ago. She noted its effect now with something between warmth and caution. "You look incredible," he said. His voice was still the same, unhurried, a little low, the kind of voice that made you feel like whatever you were about to say actually mattered. "I mean it. You look..." He shook his head slightly, and there was something almost helpless in it. "Exactly like yourself." She laughed, and it came out more easily than she expected. "Is that a compliment?" "The highest one I know." She became aware, somewhere in the back of her mind, that her heart was doing something slightly embarrassing. She hadn't been aware of her own heartbeat she genuinely could not remember. She dealt with people every day. difficult people, powerful people, people who cried in her office, and people who threatened to, people who lied to her face, and people who begged her. None of them had ever made her aware of her own heartbeat. She found it mildly inconvenient. "Sit down," she said, gesturing to the chair across from her. The invitation came out almost like an instruction, an old reflex, and she softened it slightly. "Please, if you have time." He glanced at his watch. It was a brief glance, the kind that answers a question before it's been asked. Something in it, the slight hesitation, the private calculation behind his eyes, made her feel, very briefly, like a detour. And then he pulled out the chair and sat, and the feeling passed. He set his paper bag on the table and unfolded the top of it, pushing it toward her with the quiet ease of someone who had always done things like that without thinking about it. Inside was the sesame bagel, pulled neatly into two halves. "You want some?" "I've already eaten," she said. She took a half. He smiled at that, a small, knowing smile, and something about it made her feel 17 years younger, in a way that she found both pleasant and deeply inconvenient. "So," she said, wrapping both hands around her coffee cup, watching him. "Where have you been, Lara? You just..." She tilted her head slightly. "Disappeared?" He nodded, as if he had been expecting the question, as if he had perhaps rehearsed an answer for it at some point, and then forgotten the rehearsal. "Morocco," he said. "Right after graduation, there was a civil engineering contract, a water infrastructure project in the south of the country. I was going to be there for a year." He paused. "I was there for 4. 4 years. The project kept expanding, and He looked at the table for a moment. I liked the distance, I think, at the time. She didn't ask what he needed distance from. She had learned in her line of work that the most important questions were often the ones you let sit. And after Morocco, I came back. A pause. Heartbreak has a way of sending you home. He said it without drama, without any particular bid for sympathy. The way you state a fact about weather. Spent some time with my mother in Denver. Then I couldn't stay still. Got a contract in Houston, then one in Chicago, then up to Vancouver for 18 months. He looked up at her. You know how it is. You keep moving until you forget what you were moving away from. And then Seattle. Something shifted in his expression, barely perceptible, a small brightening, like a window opening in a room that had been closed. And then Seattle, he said. About 6 years ago, got brought in as the lead structural engineer on the waterfront redevelopment. Decided to stay. You like it here? I love it here, he said simply, with the quiet conviction of someone who has earned their contentment. And then I met my wife here. The sentence landed with perfect ordinaries. He said it the way anyone might say it, matter-of-factly, even warmly, and Talon absorbed it with a professional's composure, which meant that her expression did not change in any meaningful way, and her hand did not tighten on her coffee cup, and she did not look away. But for just a moment, less than a second, a fraction of a second, the duration of a single heartbeat, their eyes met across the small table with an honesty that neither had arranged. And then it was gone, and Talon smiled. I'm glad, she said, and she was, mostly. She picked up her half of the bagel. You know, she said, her tone shifting into something lighter, a little wry. I still think about the fact that you made me pay for our first date. Do you know how often I think about that? He laughed, a real laugh, surprised out of him, and it was a good laugh, low and warm. There were extenuating circumstances. Name one. I had. He pressed his lips together, suppressing a smile. A cash flow situation. You were an engineering student with a part-time job and a meal plan. A complicated cash flow situation. She shook her head, laughing despite herself. And for a few minutes, they were simply two people in a coffee bar on a Tuesday morning, and the 15 years between them felt like something that could be folded and put in a pocket. You were always so... He stopped, looked at her for a moment with something quiet and genuine in his expression. You were always so beautiful, Talon. I don't think I ever told you that enough. Things were good back then. Really good. She held his gaze for a moment. They were, she said. He leaned back slightly, as if recalibrating the conversation toward something safer. So, what does Talon Voss do in Seattle? Don't tell me you followed me here. I was here first, she said. I took a position at Bennett and Sugar straight out of law school. She watched his face register the name. The faint flicker of recognition that the firm's reputation tended to produce. Spent 7 years there, made partner, and then she paused, choosing the word with the precision of long habit. Outgrew them. So you left. I started my own firm. Of course you did. He said it with a smile that was not surprised so much as inevitability. The smile of someone hearing a story and the way it was always going to end. And what kind of law? She picked up her coffee, held it. Divorce, she said. The word fell between them like something with weight. She watched it happen, the change in him. It was subtle enough that most people would have missed it. But Talon had spent nearly a decade reading the precise moment when a person sitting across a table from her understood the relevance of what they were hearing. She saw it in the way his shoulders settled, just slightly, as if something had become heavier. She saw it in his eyes, those soft, unhurried brown eyes, as they moved inward for just a moment, toward some private and apparently very dark space. He said nothing. The silence stretched between them, and Talon let it, the way she always let silences do their work. The coffee bar moved around them, the hiss of the machine, the low murmur of other people's ordinary Tuesday mornings. And Lara sat across from her and looked at the table and was somewhere else entirely. Lara, her voice was quiet. What's wrong? He looked up. His expression was careful now. The openness of a few minutes ago folded away behind something more measured, and she recognized the look. She had seen it dozens of times in her conference room, on the faces of people sitting across from her who had not yet decided how much to say. Would it be all right, he said slowly, if we met later? This evening, maybe. He stopped, started again. There's something I'd like to talk to you about. She looked at him for a moment. Of course, she said, whenever suits you. He nodded. He looked relieved, and also, beneath the reveal, still somewhere in that dark place she had seen him go. He glanced at his watch. A longer look this time. Not the polite hesitation of before, but a genuine reckoning with time. I have to go, he said. He stood, buttoning his coat. She reached into her bag and produced a card. Cream-coloured, simple. Talon Voss, Voss and Associates, in clean black type, and held it out to him. He took it, looked at it for a moment. Then he looked at her, and something moved across his face that she couldn't fully name. Something old and careful and not entirely resolved. They stood, and he leaned forward and kissed her on the cheek, gently, slowly. The way you handle something you want to be careful with. And she felt the warmth of it long after he had stepped back. "I'll call you," he said quietly. And then he was gone, moving through the glass door and out into the grey October morning. And Talon stood by her table and watched him go. Watched him until he had turned the corner and disappeared from sight, before she sat back down, folded her hands around her cold coffee cup, and stared at the screen of her laptop without reading a single word of it. The Harrington settlement could wait. The offices of Voss and Associates had a particular sound in the evenings. It started around 6. The gradual unpacking of the day. The soft percussion of keyboards going quiet, one by one. The rolling chairs. The zip of bags. The low register murmur of people transitioning out of their professional selves and back into the ones that waited for them at home. Talon had catalogued it over the years without meaning to. The way you catalogue the sound of a building you spent enough time in to know its rhythms by heart. Night, Miss Voss. Good night, Daniel. She didn't look up from the screen. She heard him go, heard the elevator button, the soft mechanical arrival, the closing of the doors, and then there were 2 of them left, and then 1, and then the office settled into its evening quiet, the way a held breath finally releases. Through the floor-to-ceiling glass by her corner office. She could see the lights of Seattle arranging themselves against the darkening sky. Down on the street, 22 floors below, the city was doing what cities do at 6:30 on a weekday evening, filling restaurants, hailing cabs, moving in that particular purposeful way of people with somewhere warm to be. She watched it for a moment, the way she sometimes allowed herself to watch it, and then she looked back at her screen. The Harrington file was open. It had been open since this morning, when she had sat in her gustos with a cold Americano and half a sesame bagel and 15 years of history sitting across from her in a grey coat. She had billed 4 hours against it since returning to the office, and she was reasonably confident that at least 3 of those hours had been productive. She was reading, for the 3rd time, a clause relating to the division of a vacation property in Aspen when her phone rang. She looked at it for one full ring. Then she picked up Talon. His voice was the same as it had been this morning, unhurried, a little low, but there was something quieter in it now, something that had been drained of the easy warmth of their reunion and replaced with something more careful. Is this still all right? We don't have to do this tonight. We could leave it for tomorrow, if that's easier. She leaned back in her chair. Outside, the last of the light was leaving the sky. I work late, she said. If you're still in the area, you're welcome to come up. A beat of silence. Then, with something in his voice that might have been relief, or might have been something else entirely. I'm already at your reception, as it turns out. She paused. I'll buzz you through, she said. Give me a moment. She put the phone down and sat for exactly 3 seconds, which was all the time she allowed herself. Then she stood, moved to the small mirror she kept behind the door. Not vanity, she had always told herself, simply professionalism, simply the awareness that appearance was a form of language, and she had always been passionate with her words, and looked at herself with the dispassionate eye of a woman accustomed to assessing things accurately. Her hair was still good. Her lipstick had faded to something softer than it had been this morning, which was, she decided, acceptable. She straightened the collar of her blouse, pressed her palms briefly against the front of her trousers, and was, by the time she reached the hallway, entirely composed. The reception area of Voss and Associates occupied the front quarter of the 22nd floor, and Talon had spent a considered amount of money making it say exactly what she wanted it to say before a single word was spoken. The floors were pale ash hardwood, the desk long, low, seamlessly built in, was a deep charcoal stone that caught the recessed light in a way that suggested both seriousness and permanence. On the walls hung 3 large format works she had acquired over the better part of 4 years. A vast, brooding abstract in oils that dominated the far wall like a weather system, flanked by 2 quieter pieces, a field of muted gold that shifted depending on where you stood, and a stark geometric study in black and white that her junior attorney Marcus had once described with complete sincerity as intimidating. She thought that was the right word for it. Yasmin, her receptionist, had already gone, her desk cleared, her monitor dark, the small vase of white tulips she kept on the corner of her desk, the only evidence of recent occupation. The space was empty except for Lara, who stood with his back partially to the elevator, a worn leather sling bag over one shoulder, his hands in the pockets of his coat, looking up at the large oil painting on the far wall with the focused, unguarded attention of someone who has forgotten, for a moment, Where they are, Talon stood in the hallway entrance and watched him. He hadn't heard her. He was still looking at the painting, at the great dark movement of it, the compressed energy of ochre and shadow and deep arterial red, with his head tilted just slightly, the way people tilt their heads at things that are asking something of them. She watched the line of his shoulders, the quiet stillness of him in the empty room, and thought, briefly, unwillingly, that he looked like a man carrying something heavy in a way he had long since learned to make look effortless. "It's called After the Storm," she said. He turned, and the expression on his face when he saw her, something between surprise and something warmer, something that rearranged itself quickly, but not quite quickly enough, was the kind of expression Talon filed away without acknowledging. "I wasn't sure if that was a question or a statement from the painter," he said. He looked around the reception with the slow appreciation of someone taking careful stock. "This is..." He shook his head slightly. "This is very you, Talon. I'll take that as a compliment." It was meant as one. He moved toward her, his eyes still traveling the room. The stone desk, the pale floors, the paintings, with the particular eye of an engineer, she thought. Someone who understood intuitively the relationship between space and intention. "You built all of this." "I did." He smiled, that low, quiet smile, and reached her, and she saw it coming, the way she always saw things coming. The slight lean forward, the familiar warmth of this morning still in the muscle memory of them both, the natural inclination toward her cheek. She turned, smoothly and without comment, offering her shoulder instead, so that what might have been a kiss became simply the near geometry of two people adjusting to the same space. "Miss Voss." They both turned. One of her junior associates, Lawrence, 26, still in his coat with his laptop bag over his shoulder, was rounding the corner from the back corridor toward the elevator, and he raised a hand in the slightly uncertain way of someone who has walked into an atmosphere he can't quite read. Heading out, he said, directing it at Talon. Good night, Lawrence. Her voice was the voice she used in the office. Warm, even, carrying the effortless authority of a woman entirely at home in her own building. He pressed the elevator button. The doors opened. He went. Talon turned back to Lara and gestured down the hallway. Come through. She loved this part. She would never say that out loud. It was the kind of admission that sounded like vanity, when it was actually something more complicated than that. But she loved the moment when someone walked into her office for the first time. She had built it carefully over years, the same way some people build a case, deliberately, with attention to what each element was doing and why. The corner position meant 2 full walls of glass. The city spread out below in every direction. 22 floors of accumulated sky. The desk, a single slab of reclaimed walnut, 8 feet long, its surface clear except for her laptop, a lamp, and a small brass clock sat in front of the windows like a sentence at the end of a very long paragraph. The bookshelves that lined the interior wall held law volumes and case reports alongside things she had chosen purely because she loved them. A small bronze figure, a stack of dog-eared novels, a framed photograph of a coastline she had never publicly identified. The 2 low chairs positioned in front of her desk were deep and good. Real leather, the color of dark honey, and she had placed them at an angle to each other that was conversational without being intimate. She had gone significantly beyond her means to acquire all of it. The entire floor, not just the corner, Not just the senior partner's suite, but the whole floor, had been a decision that had made her accountant go very quiet for a very long time. The art alone, the furniture, the build-out. She had signed the lease and the invoices and the credit agreements with the steady hand of someone who was either very confident or very committed to appearing so, and she had decided somewhere between the two that it amounted to the same thing. It would pay itself off. She knew it the way she knew the things she was most certain of, not from evidence, but from the bone-deep, unargued knowledge of her own trajectory. She watched Lara walk in. He stopped just inside the doorway, the way they always did, and took it in. The glass, the city, the desk, the low amber light of the lamp catching the walnut, and the leather, and the pale reflection of Seattle spread out below them, like a map of something that could be won. He didn't say anything for a moment. He just looked. Good, she thought. Sit, she said, and moved to the low cabinet to the left of the bookshelves, where she kept 2 bottles and a small arrangement of crystal glasses. She poured 2 measures of whiskey, a single malt she had been given by a grateful client 2 years ago, and had been rationing ever since. She carried them to the sitting area in front of her desk, where she placed them on the low table between the 2 chairs, and settled into one of them, crossing her legs and resting her notepad on her knee with the unhurried ease of a woman entirely at home in her own gravity. Lara sat across from her. Behind them both, her desk chair stood empty behind the great walnut slab, and she felt its presence the way she always did, the quiet, declarative weight of it. She didn't need to sit in it right now. It was doing its work perfectly well from there. He picked up his glass, looked at it for a moment, looked at her. "Miss Voss," he said. his voice carrying a note of gentle inquiry. "That's still your name?" She took a sip. "It is," she said. He turned the glass slowly in his hand. "You always were." He paused, choosing carefully. "You always were so focused, so directed toward what you were building." He looked around the room once more, and then back at her, and his expression was honest. "It suits you, not being married. I think it always suited you." She regarded him for a moment over the rim of her glass. "I'm not entirely sure how to take that," she said. The corner of his mouth moved. "Take it as an observation from someone who always admired you." She let the moment pass, set her glass down, uncapped her pen. "Lara," her voice shifted, not unkind, but direct now, the way it got when the pleasantries had served their purpose. "What's going on?" He looked at his glass, and the last of the easy warmth went out of him, like a light being turned down, slowly, until what was left was something quieter and considerably heavier. And he sat there for a moment in it without speaking. "My marriage," he said finally. "I don't." He stopped, drew a breath. "I don't know what to do." Talon held his gaze. She let the silence do what silences do. Then she said, with the measured, unhurried delivery of someone who has learned to say the difficult thing as a form of kindness, "People who come to see me, Lara, tend to know exactly what they want to do." She paused. "They may not have admitted it yet, but they know." She held his eyes for a moment. "And as much as I am very glad to look at your beautiful face this evening, that applies to you as well." Something moved through his expression, something between a flinch and a recognition. He held her gaze for a moment longer than was comfortable, and then he reached forward, and placed his glass on the low table between them. Talon glanced at the table's surface, the good, dark wood, and said nothing. She simply slid a coaster across the table toward him with one finger. A single, efficient movement. He looked at it, looked at her. "I'm sorry," he said, and he meant it. She could tell the difference. After all these years, between the apology that is social reflex and the one that comes from somewhere real. He placed his glass on the coaster, settled back, and began. She is like a window that has been painted over. From the inside, it still looks like a window. It still lets in a certain kind of light, but you can't see through it anymore. And the light that comes in. He turned his glass slowly. It doesn't warm anything. It started, I want to say it started 2 years ago, but I think the honest answer is that it started earlier than that, and I simply chose not to see it. Because you do that, don't you? When you love something, you make accommodations. You adjust your expectations quietly, one small degree at a time, and you tell yourself it's normal. It's the rhythm of a long relationship. All couples go through this. He stopped, exhaled, and then one day you look up and you've adjusted so far from where you started that you don't recognize the view anymore. She doesn't. He pressed his lips together. She doesn't come home when she says she'll come home. And I don't mean occasionally. I mean that a dinner at 7 becomes 9, becomes 11, becomes a text at midnight that says don't wait up. And I lie in our bed in the dark trying to remember the last time she reached for me first. His voice was steady, impressively steady, she thought. The steadiness of someone who has said some version of this to himself so many times that the rawness has been worn smooth by repetition. And when she is home, she is not unkind exactly, She is fluent in the performance of kindness. She knows how to say the right thing at the right moment, in the right tone of voice. But there is nothing behind it. You reach toward it and your hand goes through it. She tells me I'm too sensitive. He said it quietly, without bitterness, which made it worse somehow. She tells me that I ask too much, that I am, her word, consuming, that my need for closeness is a kind of weight she can't carry. And I hear it often enough, and I begin to believe it, because that is what those words are designed to do, isn't it? They are designed to make you the problem. They are designed to make you so busy defending the reasonableness of your own feelings that you stop looking at what's happening in front of you. Talon's pen moved steadily. There have been... He stopped here, and for the first time his composure showed its seams, just slightly, a tightening at the jaw, a moment in which he looked down at his hands as though the words were there, and he was deciding whether to pick them up. I believe there have been other people. I can't prove it. I have. He looked up. His eyes were steady but dark. I have the evidence of instinct. I have the way a phone gets turned face down when you walk into a room. I have the particular quality of a lie told fluently. And I have spent enough of my life around structures that are unsound to know what a thing looks like when it is bearing weight it hasn't declared. Talon turned a page on her notepad. I have come home to the specific silence of a room that has been recently occupied by a mood that doesn't match the excuse given for it. I have found not evidence, nothing that stands up, nothing I can point to and say this, but the residue of things, an absence where there should be a presence, a name that appears too casually, too often, in the kind of tone that is trying very hard to be neutral. He picked up his glass and drank, and when he set it down again, he looked at her with the eyes of a man who has been precise and careful and is exhausted by it. I have chosen for 2 years to give the benefit of the doubt. I have given it until the doubt has run out, and there is nothing left to benefit. The room was quiet around them. Below the glass, Seattle held its 1,000 lights without comment. How long have you been married? Talon asked. 6 years. She wrote it down. Then, and what does your wife do, Lara, for work? Something shifted in his posture. A small, complicated movement, as if the question had arrived at a place he had been circling. Shipping, he said. International freight. She built it from a regional logistics consultancy. He paused. She's done very well. The company turns over, I don't know the exact figures. I was never across the details. Talon's pen slowed. She wrote the word shipping and underlined it once. And then she looked up and asked the question that she asked in every conversation, the one that functioned in her experience, both as procedure and as a very particular kind of diagnostic. Do you have a copy of the prenuptial agreement? The silence that followed was approximately 3 seconds long. In those 3 seconds, Talon watched several things happen on Lara's face in close succession. The initial stillness of a man who has heard a question he has been quietly dreading, followed by something that might have been the specific shame of an intelligent person confronting an intelligent mistake, followed by the straightening of shoulders that precedes an admission. There isn't one, he said. Talon looked at him. She was a woman who had built her professional life on the managed expression, on the trained, deliberate neutrality of a face that gave away nothing in moments when everything depended on giving away nothing. She had sat across from lying husbands and vindictive wives, and people with more money than morality, and she had not, in 11 years of practice, let her face do anything she hadn't authorized it to do. She picked up her whiskey glass and took a long, slow sip. The warmth of it moved through her, and she set the glass back on its coaster, and she looked at Lara Agatha, this beautiful, serious, soft-eyed man who had walked back into her life on a Tuesday morning, smelling like cedar and carrying half a bagel. And she thought about a shipping company and 6 years of marriage and a very substantial amount of jointly accumulated assets, and the particular irreversible vulnerability of a person who had trusted someone enough not to protect themselves. "All right," she said after a moment. She turned to a fresh page.